Well, how do you determine what the proper length of pull is for your rifles? And is the 4570 Government an overrated cartridge? We're hoping to find out on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors podcast. Hi, everyone. Say a patron is wondering about the proper length of pull, and another one is concerned about building a replacement barrel for his Savage rifle. And there are just all sorts of things going on this week. We're going to see if we can help these folks out and maybe answer a few questions and complaints from all of you. Let's dive right in with one of our patrons, William. Ron, first, I really enjoy your podcast. It's my go-to channel for when I'm traveling to and from work. Now, I'm planning a project for 2025, and I'm wanting your thoughts. I have a Savage rifle in 270 that I would like to rebarrel to 280 Ackley improved. As you, I really like the 7mm rifles, and I know that your fondness of the 280 AI is pretty high, so now I want to add that one to my collection. Over the years, I have done a few projects with Sporter Rifle, Carl Gustav 96 Mausers in 6.5 by 55, plus a 1903 Springfield in 30-06. I have added triggers and Boyd stocks and etc. Now, making them hunting rifles, before all the haters start in, I want you to know that they were already made into Sporter rifles before I got them, so no classic military rifles were harmed. Well, this is my plan using that Savage action and adding a pre-fit 280 AI barrel with a 1-in-8 twist and then upgrading to a Boyd stock, a Timney trigger, and a quality but rather simple scope, probably a 3-9 or a 4-12. What are your thoughts on the build? Any advice? Completely off this subject, but I think the 6.5 Grendel for eastern whitetail deer never gets any love. I have had great results using it at a bolt action rifle. Have a wonderful day, Will. I wrote Will back and said, hey, glad you're enjoying my content. But for that rifle, I think you have it well under control. The only thing that I would double check is that pre-fit barrel. I'm not sure your Savage action has the required tolerances for a pre-fit. You might have to do some headspace adjustment, although the Savage locking ring should easily accommodate that. Really, a pre-fit barrel shouldn't even be necessary. Any barrel threaded for a Savage bolt action should fit. You just need the go, no-go headspace gauge to set your headspace. Shaw Custom Barrels used to sell complete kits for installing Savage barrels, so you might want to check that out. Good luck. Hey, you're going to love the 280 Ackley improved. All right, now another patron is Seth. Just picked up a new Howa Mini action in 6mm ARC and with a walnut stock. It's for my young son. The stock has a standard 13.5-inch length of pull. Is there a method or a formula to calculate proper length of pull so I can have my stock cut down, or do I have to use the cut a little at a time and then just test it as I go? All right, Seth. Here is the general accepted rule for this. Now, it varies a little bit, but let's just start. You want the distance from your crooked elbow inside out to the trigger finger when you've got it crooked as if you're hooking the trigger. And I like to raise my arm as if I'm shooting. Now, if you're one of these shooters that keeps his arm down, that's fine too. But there you want pretty much a right angle bend in your arm so that your forearm's coming out to where your trigger finger would be. So my method, if you're not watching this, you're just listening to it, I've got my elbow raised. I'm one of those old-fashioned guys who shoots in the traditional style with my chicken wing out here, the trigger hand, with the elbow out nice and square. So I've got a straight line coming off my shoulder. The butt of the rifle is going to be right here in my shoulder. And then I've got a little bit of a bend in my arm reaching to that trigger, as you should be able to see. So I want the distance now from inside of my elbow out to my finger right at the pad where I would be engaging the trigger shoe. Measure that distance. That's your length of pull. Now, variations come in on that based on your length of neck, how much you like to lean forward and such. But as you can imagine, do this and move back and forth, and you can see if you've got a longer length of pull than usual, you can easily move that elbow forward while keeping the butt of the rifle in your shoulder, reach a little bit farther forward. You can also move your head on the comb of the stock farther forward or a little bit farther back. Now, Betsy shoots about a 13-inch length of pull, sometimes a little bit shorter, but somewhere in that 13-inch range, maybe 12 and a half. And I can pick her rifles up and shoot them because I've done it enough that I just feel it and I know that it's too close to me, so I just slide my head back a little bit farther on the stock. If it's not a hard-kicking rifle, no big problem. But that is how I would recommend you do it. So whoever your shooter is, have them assume that pose and then do that measurement. And if you have a few rifles around with different lengths of pull, of course, you can try with that as well. So in addition to that neck difference and how you like to lean forward or back, you also want to consider hand size because some people have a really big hand and a long finger. Most of that should be accommodated by that measurement as long as you're coming out to that first pad of the finger. That should do it for you. All right, let's see. Richard. Richard is another patron. Ron, I was listening to one of your older podcasts, and a viewer had written about mass versus energy and mentioning that frontal diameter of a bullet does account for something. Well, it certainly does. I know there have been a great debate on this topic, and I had thought the same as that other viewer for some time. To the point of I worked up a load in a 45-70. I used a 300-grain Hornady jacket at hollow point with about 47 grains of IMR 4895 powder and hunting with that. I took a decent whitetail for where I hunt in North Carolina, but I took it at about 30 meters. The shot was well placed just behind the left front shoulder, and the deer ran approximately 40 meters before expiring. The bullet separated, but it expanded almost double its 4.58 diameter, but there was no exit hole. The blood trail was not as heavy as I thought it would be, and the round did no more damage and maybe less damage than that of a high-velocity .308 Winchester round, especially when I'm using copper Amano bullets. It seems like a good round to hunt in thick forests where you have mostly bow-range shots, but I wouldn't want to push it out past 80 to 100 meters. I vaguely remember you mentioning the 45-70 did not give the energy punch that many people think it might have. That was what I figured out with it as well. It still works fine, but it just didn't hit hard enough to gut and skin the deer before it hit the ground. I'm still looking for that round. Well, that's interesting, Richard, and it pretty much confirms what I found about the 45-70. There just seems to be this aura or myth around the 45-70 because it was a big government cartridge, obviously 45. Right away, people think, ooh, that's a big one. Fairly long and big, heavy bullets. But that cartridge started in 1873, and it was originally chambered in a fairly weak action called the trapdoor Springfield. So the energy levels are pretty low. The maximum average chamber pressures are way down there. I forgot what they are exactly, but it's pretty weak, about 28,000 cup or maybe 30, 32, somewhere in there. But at any rate, ammunition manufacturers these days need to keep their loads light, not too much pressure, so they don't get in trouble if someone uses that ammo in an older rifle that might give up the ghost, shall we say, if you go to higher pressures. The case can certainly handle it, and modern rifles can. So most 45-70 shooters these days prefer to go with something like the 1895 lever-action rifle or the 86 Winchester. The first one was a Marlin. The 86 Winchester was one of the first beefed-up lever actions that could take more pressure. And then you can crank that up, but you have to be careful in buying your ammunition. The other thing is to go from the 300-grain bullet, which is mostly offered in factory loads, to a 400, 405-grain bullet, and a few places you can even get to a 500-grain bullet. That extra mass will really make a difference. But I think for most average shooters who kind of think the 45-70 would be cool, they pick up some factory loads, and it's a 300-grain bullet going perhaps 1,800 to 1,900 feet per second. Your muzzle energy is only going to be around 2,200 to 2,300 foot-pounds. And because it's such a blunt, inefficient bullet, at 100 yards, you're getting closer to 1,500 foot-pounds of remaining energy, which isn't a heck of a lot. Now, yes, you are going to have that larger diameter hole initially, but as you discovered, even though you got good expansion to almost double that, you didn't get through penetration. Your bullet stopped inside. And then there's another observation. Your deer ran 40 yards, didn't get knocked over. Most people say, ooh, that big heavy bullet, and you keep all of that energy inside and don't shoot through, all that energy is going to kill that deer just like that. Sounds to me like you made a perfect shot. All the energy did stay inside of the deer, didn't knock him over, didn't kill him instantly. Energy doesn't kill. Only when you convert energy into work with some mechanical device do you get the effect you need, which is hemorrhaging. So kind of confirms everything that I found about bullets in general. Your higher velocity with your little .308 Winchester does and or can at least put more energy on target and do more damage because of the expansion of that bullet and increased penetration, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the message for all of us is to don't depend on a big, mythically strong, massive bullet to hit like a bigger hammer. Bullets don't necessarily act like hammers and anvils and all things like that. You've got to consider what those bullets are doing to tissues to break them down. So, but all that said, if you do use the heavier bullets and you drive them at higher velocities, you're starting to get a lot better performance on that 45-70. It is certainly up to the job, and that's the reason why it's beloved up in the North Country where you might run into grizzly bears. Yeah, people will use those for grizzly defense, and when you've got those bigger, heavier bullets at higher velocities, it certainly can work. All right, let's see what Betsy pulled up for me here. These are off of Ron Spomer Outdoors website comments, right? Comments and questions?
Correct.
Okay, so we are going to really be addressing more and more of these, and this one is from Missouri, where Aaron writes in, Ron, I own a 7mm Remington Magnum, and I regularly shoot 150 grain boat tails, and I have complaints that at 150 yards or less, it seems like I'm wasting ammo for a 150 to 200 pound deer. I have seen your fondness for the 7mm 08 and was wondering your opinion on loading a 175 grain Barnes TSX for the 08 cartridge for the kinetic energy for the same distance and distances of pass through. So if I am interpreting this correctly, Aaron, you're thinking the 7 Rem Mag has more horsepower than you really need, so you go to a 708. But I'm not with you on that 175 grain bullet. To me, that is comparable to a little excessive and waste of bullet energy on a little old 150 to 200 pound deer. You really don't need that much bullet. And then especially if you go with a Barnes TSX all copper, and talk about penetration. Yeah, you're going to penetrate through that deer and probably the next two behind it. That's way more than you really need. So if you are thinking about reducing things for these smaller deer and closer ranges, in addition to slowing your velocity down from 7 Rem Mag to 708 Remington, you can keep your bullet weight down there at 150 or even 140. I have had great luck over the years with various medium velocity to lower velocity 7mm, 280 Winchester, 280 Remington, 757 Mauser, and that kind. Those work great with 140 grain bullets, maybe 150s. I really don't think you need to go to a 175. Now, if you went elk hunting or moose hunting, that would be an outstanding bullet for that. So you might want to give that a try. Now, another option, if you're a hand loader, of course, is just to load down your 7 Rem Mag. You can get a starting load with not much powder in those and do the same thing you would do with the 708 Remington. And you wouldn't have to get another rifle. So I guess the rifle manufacturers would like me not to say that. It's too late. It's already out there. No, really, that is not a bad plan. A lot of older guys, when I was growing up, would do that. We didn't have extra money in those days. So if you wanted your rifle to do double duty or quad duty, you could facilitate that by how you hand loaded it. So you might want to consider that. All right, now in Iowa, we hear from Brian. Ron, I have a Remington 722. That was a bolt-action Remington rifle, the predecessor to the Model 700. So it was probably out back in the 1950s because the 700 came out in 1962. So he has the Remington 722 in an old classic, the 244 Remington. How many of you know what that is? The 244 Remington I've always thought that was one of the coolest names for a cartridge out there. And it is a 24, and it is the 6mm Remington today. They renamed it. The 244 came out in 1955. Same time as the 243 Winchester. This was Winchester and Remington, the big two, going neck and neck, head to head, fighting over new customers for the hot new 24s. And the 6mm Remington at the time was the 244, and it was about 100 feet per second faster than the 243. But the 243 was offered with 100 grain bullets in their ammunition line, in addition to, I think, an 85 grain bullet. So one was for varmints, the other for deer. Remington had, I think, a 75 grain varmint bullet and a 90 grain deer bullet. But most people thought 90 grains isn't a deer bullet. So they went with the 243, even though the Remington was putting more energy on target. So it was kind of a silly way to lose the game, but they did lose it. And because they didn't have much interest in their 244 after a few years, they decided to re-release it with a new name, and they called it the 6mm Remington. But they did one other important thing. They increased the twist rate of the barrel. The reason they only went up with a 90 grain bullet originally in that 244 was because they had, I think, a 1 in 12 inch twist, whereas the 243 Winchester had a 1 in 10 twist. That one would stabilize a longer, heavier bullet. So Remington went with a 1 in 9 twist, and then they could offer 100 grain bullets, and you could actually stabilize even heavier bullets with a 1 in 9 twist. So they came out with it, called it the 6mm Remington, and that's what we know it as today. Unfortunately, it's pretty moribund. It's a great cartridge, and if you like to play around with something a little bit different, I would recommend getting one. Now, let's get back to poor Brian here, who probably thinks we forgot who he even is. He's got the 722 in 244 Remington. Now, I got this gun from my father, Brian says. I'm thinking about changing the barrel out, and I would like to know if I should go with a 1 in 8 twist barrel and shoot some higher BC bullets through it, or would you suggest a different twist rate? Brian, I think that's exactly what you should do. 1 in 9 would probably work just fine, but if you don't particularly want to shoot really light bullets, and you can get as light as, I think, 55 grains in a 243, that's your bullet diameter. But if you want to go with, say, 75 grain bullets on up, I would go with that 1 in 8 twist, and you can probably shoot the 105 grains, maybe even stabilize the 115s. They've got some pretty big, long bullets nowadays. And that 6mm Remington, or your 244, will definitely handle them. So yeah, if you're going to change out barrels, I would do that. Hey, you're going to have fun with that one. It's a great whitetail round. I've used it on mule deer and pronghorn, outstanding for pronghorn, and great for coyotes, of course. Yeah, the first year I got it was a 6mm Remington, and I picked it up, I think, in 1971. And oh boy, I got whitetails and pronghorns and mule deer and coyotes and foxes and jackrabbits. I was in South Dakota at the time, and the hunting was outstanding, and so was the collecting. I ate high off the hog, shall we say. All right, now up in the wooded country of Michigan comes Jordan. Mr. Spomer, I'm a huge fan, love all your videos. Well, thank you so much, Jordan. Really appreciate that. My question is, what is the best round for a 16-inch or shorter barrel, like as short as 10.5 inches? Most of my hunting locations for whitetail deer are thick woods, where my longest shot would be 150 yards. My rounds would include 6.5 Creedmoor, 6.8 Western, 243 Winchester, or even a 50 caliber Beowulf. I'm just curious, which cartridge loses less velocity out of a short barrel? Thank you. Okay, Jordan, I think rather than address each of those cartridges, let's just do an overview. When you're thinking of a short barrel, you are concerned that you're not going to burn all of your progressive smokeless powder. Progressive burning smokeless powder means that it has been coated so that it doesn't all go off at once. It burns down the barrel progressively to maintain continuing pressure on your bullet and get faster velocity. So you need a long barrel. Well, the slower burning your powder, the longer barrel you need. The heavier your bullet weight for your particular cartridge, the slower burning of powder you need because of inertia. You're going to get peak pressure problems with a heavy bullet if you use fast burning powder. So with, let's say what you got here, like a 6.8 Western, that's pretty high volume powder in there. And there's some pretty heavy bullets in that, 170 grain anyway. I think there's even 175 grain now. So you're going to need a slow burning powder. You need a longer barrel. Whereas the 6.5 Creedmoor, not a lot of powder supply in that one. Fairly light bullets with 129 grainers. You can shoot the 140, 143s, and that's heavy for that particular load and everything, so you need a little longer barrel there. But if you're going with the lighter bullets in any one of these, you can get away with a faster burning powder and a shorter barrel. So in general, when you're thinking of your cartridges and you want to go with a short barrel and be efficient, think of a relatively small powder capacity to begin with, and that always makes a cartridge more efficient. In other words, it gets kind of the best velocity it can with a light load of powder. So think 7mm 08 Remington versus 7 Remington Ultra Magnum. You got a lot more powder in that big 7 rum to get velocity, but when you look at the percentages of powder increase to velocity increase, you're burning a heck of a lot more powder for that same increase than you're going to get in velocity increase. It's just not a 1-to-1 ratio here. So it's a point of diminishing returns when you get too much powder going on there. So it's kind of like a dragster. You know, you can go really, really fast with a dragster, but boy, do you get lousy mileage. You're burning up a lot of gas to get that speed. Same with gunpowders. So think the smaller ones. Out of those you listed, I'd have to go with the 6.5 Creedmoor. I'm not enough familiar with the Beowulf, but that big 50 in a Beowulf, I don't think the case itself is all that big, so you might have that ratio in your favor on that one as well. You'd have to dive into that. I've never really fooled around with it. But that's how you kind of work with your shorter barrels. How can you shoot the faster burning powders in an efficient cartridge? Good luck with that one, Jordan. Okay, down in Central Florida somewhere, we have Peter, and he says, "Greetings, Ron. I am new to hunting. Not firearms entirely, but I'm out of my depth when it comes to scopes. I'm looking to hunt with the only rifle I have. I have shotguns, but only one rifle. That said, I've got this Marlin, a 1985 model 4570 it's chambered for, and it's stock, but I'd like to put a scope on it. Okay, this would be my first scope, and I am lost." Context: Florida brush is dense, and this would be for hogs and maybe deer. The 1895 lever-action rifle in my hands probably can't reliably and responsibly hit a target more than 200 yards out. I think you're right there. I imagine I'll be doing most of my work in 100 yards or so. So what scope makes sense? I have seen others online trying. I'm thinking of the following: a Leupold VX Freedom 1.5 to 4 by 20 millimeter, a Leupold VX Freedom Scout 1.5 to 4 by 28 millimeter, the Vortex Crossfire 2 to 7 by 32 Scout scope. How would I secure it to the rifle? I don't have a system. What would you recommend? Thanks. Oh, Peter, you definitely are kind of out of your depth here. Yeah, a lot of basics, but you're close. You're close already. You're properly thinking about the range here, and the scopes you suggest are going to do pretty well. Years ago, I would have said just get a 4X scope and be happy, and that would work for you. But having a variable, these days are almost all variables. You can't find a fixed power scope. And having a 1.5 to 4, something in that range, even a 2 to 7, just gives you a lot more options. If you end up shooting or hunting in some really dense cover where you might get a shot that's only about 10 yards away, it's nice to have a little wider view you're going to get with that 1.1 or 2X range scope. I have never had a situation in which game animal got up too close for me to target him with the 2X scope. 2X magnification to me is like almost nothing. It takes a little practice, but once you get used to it, bingo. So any of those are going to be great. Now, 2 of these you mentioned were Scout scopes, and to me that says they're going to have enhanced eye relief. So normally you're setting your scope up so that when you are cheeked on your rifle, the scope is coming back to give you the eye relief that is built into the scope. Each scope has its eye relief set. and it's usually somewhere between 3 inches and 4.5 inches. I like to get somewhere past 3.5 because the shorter the eye relief, the closer the rim of the eyepiece of the scope is to your head, and a better chance that the recoil is going to come back and give you that brow cut. So 3.5 inches gives you a lot of leeway, and 4 inches I like even better. But some of these scout scopes will stretch that out to 6 or 8 inches. Extended eye relief so that you can mount your scope farther forward on the rifle. I don't exactly know why this scout scope wants that. It's obviously needed on a handgun where you're holding it out there at arm's length, and there's your scope. Gosh, a good 12 to 16 inches from your face, you need extra eye relief. Now, you're probably wondering, what is he talking about, eye relief? Technically, it's not the distance from that scope to your head so you don't get bonked. It's the distance that the scope is away from your pupil so that you get a full field of view. If you look with a scope and you get too close, you get all that edge blackout. And then if you pull it away, you can suddenly get a full field of view. And if you keep pulling it away, here comes that blackout again. There's a sweet spot in there where you get the full field of view. And that's where you get your eye relief for function, for visual function. So I'm thinking with this shoulder-held rifle you have, you're going to want your traditional 3.5 to 4 inches or so of eye relief in your scope. So the Scout scope is probably not the one you want. The first one, the Freedom 1.5 to 4 by 20 millimeter, that sounds like spot on. Now, good news. A lot of guys will say, ooh, 20 millimeter objective. That's what that 20 millimeter stands for, the diameter of the objective lens out front that lets light in. Almost everybody's going to say, ooh, that's too small, that's too dark. You need a bigger objective out front to let more light in. Not at 4X you don't, because the light comes in at 20 millimeters and then it comes out of the exit pupil. The eyepiece, the light that's coming out, that full diameter of view you're seeing, that's the exit pupil. And its diameter is determined by the objective lens diameter divided by the power. And if you take 20 divided by 4, what do you get? 5? 5 millimeter exit pupil. What does that mean? It means that the circle of light coming out of that scope is 5 millimeters, and that matches up to your pupil in your eye. The human pupil dilates from about a minimum of 2.5 millimeters in a bright sunlight. And then when it gets dark, it opens and dilates until it's up to 7. 5, that pretty much covers what your pupil is going to dilate to at cloudy day, sunset, or half hour after sunset. You're probably dilated about 5 millimeters. So for a hunting situation, most of the time 5 millimeters is going to be as much light as you can take in. So even though it looks like a pretty tiny little objective on the front of that scope, it's going to be bright enough, especially if that scope has fully multi-coated lenses. So I think you're going to do fine with that 1.5 to 4 by 20 millimeter. That's the one I would be looking at. Now, how do you mount it? You've just got to do some research on scope rings and bases. Let's see, you've got the Marlin 1895. I think you typed it wrong here. You've got 1985. Maybe that's the year you bought it or something. But the 1895 model in the 4570 is kind of a classic. So you just need to specify some kind of a base to put on the receiver for the scope to clamp to, and then you get the rings to fit that. It's pretty cut and dried. You can go to any of the scope ring and base manufacturers and just ask them. Say, hey, look, this is my setup. What bases and rings do I need to mount this scope? And then you have to decide what the scope's main tube diameter is. And the ones you mentioned here, 1 inch is the diameter. So the ring has to be a 1 inch ring, not a 30 millimeter ring or a 32 or a 34, just the 1 inch. And then you should be set up. So good luck with that one. Andy in Minnesota. Hey, Ron, I'm an avid bow hunter. I'm looking to buy a rifle. I would like a rifle I can do everything with, from hunting in the upper Midwest, going out west and elk hunting. I think I have a caliber picked out, 7 millimeter Remington Magnum. Must have been listening to me. But now I'm going down the rabbit hole about barrel length and twist rates. I've narrowed it down to either a Browning X-Bolt 2 Speed SPR or the Tikka T3X Rough Tech. I come from a Browning family. I guess my only question is, how do you feel about a short barrel in a 7 mag with a faster twist rate versus the standard 24-inch with a 9.5 twist rate? To me, it has a lot of appeal with weight and maneuverability. Would I be doing myself a disservice with the loss of velocity and performance if I do not shoot suppressed? Thanks, Andy. P.S. I would just like to say I'd like to bend my ear about Tom. Oh, he's offering for me to call him at his phone number here. We're not going to give that out. But, Andy, I think I can answer your question here without a phone call. You're thinking right along the proper lines. I don't think you need to worry too much about twist rate. Standard with a 7 rem mag has always been around 1 in 10. Some of the faster ones are 1 in 9, but those will handle most of your bullets you're going to be looking at. If you want to go to the crazy 190 grain types you've got these days in some offerings, yeah, but really you don't need that. Gosh, we've been taking game with standard bullets in the 7 rem mag up to 175 grains since 1962. So I think you'll do fine with your 1 in 10 or 1 in 9, 1 in 9.5. That's great. But the barrel length is a concern, and these days a lot of guys are going to the shorter barrels because of the convenience and wanting to put the suppressors on. But if you don't want to put the suppressor on, I think I'd stick with that 24-inch barrel. Now, you're not going to lose all that much performance by cutting a couple of inches off for convenience. 22-inch barrel 7s, I've used those. I've taken big 6x6 elks with a 7 rem mag and a Mossberg rifle with a 22-inch barrel. I'm sacrificing perhaps 60 to at most 100 feet per second of velocity by lopping off those 2 inches. What's that going to cost you? Honestly, with a lot of ammunition I've tested over the years, I'll get 50 to 60 feet per second variation shot to shot just because of the inconsistency in the loaded ammunition. And most hunters won't even notice that with shots out to 300 yards. Now, if you want to be remarkably precise and consistent at longer ranges, then that difference in velocities starts to add up. 100 feet per second or 50 feet per second different velocity after 300 yards, it starts to open up more and more and more until you've got significant inches of difference between the two. You're not going to win any target competitions with that kind of inconsistency. But for hunting out to 400 yards or so, not that big of a concern. So I don't think you need to worry too much about chopping down to 22 inches. 22 inches, a little more concern there. Now you're starting to talk about 150 to 200 feet per second difference. You might as well get yourself a 280 AI or 280 Remington or even a 7mm 08. So I think I would stick with it and maybe compromise with the 22. But I recommend you really look into those suppressors. I am starting to enjoy the heck out of those just because I no longer have to worry about that muzzle blast. And I know a lot of people think I overdo it, but at my age, with all the shooting that I've done and the hearing loss that I've suffered as a result, it really means something. Didn't mean anything to me when I was in my 20s, and okay, my ears are ringing, big deal, I'll recover. Well, eventually, too much of that, and you don't recover. And then you're going, huh? What? And you can't hear all the overtones in music anymore, so it's not enjoyable. You can't understand your grandkids because they're high-pitched. Can't understand your wife because she has a high-pitched voice. Yeah, it's a real problem. So I would definitely look into suppressors and consider starting to use those when you hunt. I know you can say, well, gee whiz, how long does it take to plug your ears with something? But having been there, done that, I can tell you there are situations where it's like now or never, look at the size of that buck. I guess I'm going to sacrifice some more hearing and I take the shot. And I've done it way too many times. Having that suppressor on the end of the barrel, I can take the shot without ruining my hearing. So there I would say look at that 18 to 20 inch barrel and live with it. What I mean by live with it, of course, is got a more of a looping trajectory. But again, with a laser rangefinder and a known distance to your target, and you know your trajectory drops with the scopes we have today that dial and all the rest of it, or extra lines in there, you can compensate for those drops. They're consistent. Yeah, it takes a little more work, but almost all the young guys are doing that now, and it's become routine. And once you practice at it, you can get so good that, yeah, it's a little slower than just having your maximum point-blank range, what I like, and taking quick shots that way. But yeah, it's sure worth it to save your hearing. So there you go. Probably more information than you even bargained for. Now, here is Tyrell in Utah. Hi, Ron. I love your content. You're truly one of a kind. You know your stuff. You're excellent at explaining bullets and ballistics and etc. Well, thank you, Tyrell. I appreciate that. My question is, will they come out with a 25 PRC? And do you think it will be based off of the 7 or the 6.5 PRC? In my humble opinion, if they do, it should be off the 6.5 because the 7 might be too much of a barrel burner. Although you will get the higher velocities with shorter barrels. What are your thoughts? Thanks, and keep up the good work. Well, you are thinking about what a lot of people are thinking about. And here's the deal with 25s. Over the last 20, 25 years or so, with all the developments in cartridges and whatnot, we've kind of been ignoring the 25s. In the early years, we had the 250 Savage, then the 257 Roberts, the 25-06, the 257 Weatherby Magnum, and they were pretty popular for quite a while, but never as popular as the 7s. And then these 6.5s came along. Those were not popular in the 20th century. We had a few, but boy, nobody paid much attention to them. Suddenly, with that Creedmoor breaking the ice, actually the 260 Remington came out in late or mid-1990s, and then the 6.5 Creedmoor, and that went crazy, and now it's 6.5 everywhere. But they've ignored the 25s, and I think what's happened is manufacturers are saying, hey, here's a field we haven't mined yet. Nobody's building new cartridges for 25 or modern high BC bullets for the 25. Let's start doing that. Well, all the older 25s aren't twisted fast enough for longer bullets. So a few people, knowing that there were wildcatters playing around with the 25s, started offering some longer high BC bullets. And that sort of started getting the ball rolling. Now we need some cartridges with fast twitch barrels. So people are fooling around with the 25, just like you said. The problem with necking down a high volume cartridge to 25 is just what you said. Barrel burner, high pressures, pressure spikes. You're working your load up and you gradually get a little more powder and your pressures, and all of a sudden a half grain of powder makes a huge difference and you've got dangerous pressures. They're just wonky that way. So kind of more moderate case like you suggest here. I think the 6.5 PRC, right now the 6.5 Creedmoor is being necked down to 25. My good friend Richard Mann did this quite a while ago, and he called his the 250, Fity, 250 Hillbilly, because that's, I guess, how hillbillies pronounce 250. 250 Hillbilly. And he's had real good luck with that. Other people have wildcatted it that way, and I understand that the official 25 Creedmoor is being loaded, factory loaded by Hornady. They haven't really announced it yet, but I think they're going to make it a SAMI cartridge. And that, I think, is probably going to be the best option in a 25. Not going to be as fast as the Magnum stuff you're suggesting. But if you do want to go that route and get an extremely fast 25, the old 257 Weatherby Magnum, been around since the 1940s. It's proven. They've got the right loads for it and everything else. You just need to get a faster twist barrel in that. Plenty of powder. Plenty of horsepower. That's a screamer. I have used the 257 Weatherby on several hunts. In fact, took a Boone & Crockett Coues deer in Mexico with a 257 Weatherby. 351-yard shot. This was back in the day before all the high BC bullets, but man, one-shot kill away out there. It's a flat shooter. It can really scream too. Taking black bears with it, yeah, great option. So you might want to consider that. Now, it's not a short action, but it is going to fit in your standard length actions, like a 270 or 30-06 action. All right, let's see what Justin in West Virginia has to say. Hello, Ron. I'm a young veteran and an avid listener and reader of yours. I really enjoy your 7mm book. I have a signed copy. Well, good to hear it, man. Happy to have signed that for you, too. I value your opinion as highly as anyone's when it comes to hunting and ballistics on live targets. However, recently I heard you mention in one of your podcasts that it simply makes no sense that a bullet of a certain weight and diameter traveling at a lower speed would cause more tissue damage. I think that query specifically mentioned punch on target than the same bullet moving at a higher velocity. From a mathematical standpoint, I certainly agree that more energy applied on target is generally better. However, I don't think that in practice that's always the case. Think about a big piece of paper stretched tightly so that it stands vertically. Now imagine what happens to that piece of paper if you push your fist through it slowly versus what happens if you punch straight through it as fast as you can. If you push your fist through slowly, it creates all sorts of tears and wrinkles in the paper. While if you punch straight through it, it makes more clean fist-shaped hole. It may not be a perfect analogy for a bullet piercing through game, but might some of these physics still apply? After all, the exit wound on an animal is almost always larger than the entry and even the expanded bullet diameter, presumably due to the decreased velocity. Am I correct? Might a slower moving bullet cause more damage around the impact area than a faster moving bullet in some cases, assuming the slower bullet still achieves adequate expansion? And another point, outside of hydrostatic shock, which seems to be a very debated topic, I fail to see how a higher velocity bullet would actually cause more tissue damage than the same bullet at a lower velocity, assuming both penetrate all the way through the animal and achieve similar expansion. I'm certainly no expert in ballistics, though I'd like to be in the future, and I'd very much like to hear your thoughts on this question. Best wishes, Justin. Yeah, Justin, you are not the first one to come up with these ideas, but I could tell that you are thinking critically here, and that's great. But I don't think you quite have it right, and the reason is simply, as you started to say, mathematically, the velocity increase really makes a difference in energy. We've repeated it many times. It's kind of a standard in Newtonian physics. If you double an object's mass at any velocity, you have doubled its energy. But if you double its velocity with any mass, you quadruple its energy. So your increase in energy is much more significant at velocity. So if you've got the same weight bullet entering at a lower velocity, you're going to put a lot more hurt on your target with a higher energy. As long as that bullet somehow mechanically transfers that energy into work. You've got to do some mechanical work with that projectile. As you could imagine, if you shoot a photon through somebody and we're being bombarded by all kinds of rays all the time and it doesn't do any damage, unless it's, I guess, gamma rays or plutonium or something, and then you get radiation sickness and it'll kill you. But as far as a pow punch damage, you've got these projectiles moving at light speed, zipping right through the earth, for gosh sake. They're not bullets, obviously, but I think it's fairly reasonable to compare this. If you get that photon converted into a solid object like a bullet and then hit something, it's going to have an impact. So, this is why they say with enough velocity, something really, really tiny can make a heck of an explosion compared to something big that just sits there or drops lightly. So it is a little hard to wrap your brain around all this stuff. But I think a better way to say this, instead of the paper analogy you were using, is to set your bullet, not the whole cartridge, just the bullet, on a solid surface like a concrete sidewalk or an anvil or something. And then take a ball peen hammer and from a foot up, strike it or drop it. Just drop it from a foot up, perfectly right on top of the bullet. You're going to dent the tip of the bullet, right? Now take a 10-pound maul and drop it on top of that same bullet from the same height. More mass hits the bullet, it squashes it a lot flatter. Or take the lighter hammer and drive it at 50 miles an hour on top of that bullet. Whoa, it's really going to smash it, right? I think the same thing is happening with game when the bullet strikes. Your bullet comes in, it strikes, and immediately begins to transfer its energy into the bullet, into the animal. Both of them affect one another. The bullet does something. If it's shaped properly and built and constructed out of the right materials, it expands. That increases its surface area. That touches more tissue. That damages more tissue. It slows down because there's more friction, but if it's fast enough and you have enough mass behind the bullet in the shank, it will continue its momentum moving forward, damaging more tissue until it punches out. The slower bullet might not make it out. You've left all the energy in the target, but didn't really do that much because you didn't reach enough tissue. And as we said earlier, with a 45-70 hitting that deer, all that energy was left in the deer and it didn't knock it over. The deer still ran 40 yards. And I've seen this with a variety of animals, in a variety of bullets. So I think, as you just intimated with a mention of hydrostatic shock, I think you mentioned, you really can't depend on that. It's always debated. Sometimes you see what appears to be this effect. Most of the time it doesn't happen. So what's going on? I just think you really need to consider how that physical bullet is damaging the tissue to take the animal. All right, that was a long one. Maryland Gabor. You don't see that name very often. I remember Zsa Zsa Gabor back in the day, but I bet there's not a lot of you out there that still remember that one. Hollywood. Gabor says, "Hi, Ron. I fired my .280 Remington into a large whitetail doe at 165 yards across an open field. My Federal trophy bonded tip bullet, 140 grains, went in about 8 inches behind the right shoulder. Deer ran, and I found it 40 yards away. No blood at all, and no bullet passed through. I never had that before with my Winchester Cup and Core rounds. I thought the bullet was supposed to be the best. Thoughts on what happened, that there was no blood or bullet pass through? Should I switch back to the old Winchester deer season or the PowerPoints? What are your thoughts? Thanks, Gabor." My thoughts are, you better do what you think is best, Gabor. But this is a bit of a mystery because that is what we call controlled expansion bullet. Trophy bonded tip. I mean, that thing stays in one piece. That should have sailed through that deer and a couple more. So exactly what happened, I do not know. But I can say this: strange things happen with bullets. I have seen it all. Every bullet I've seen has done exactly what it was supposed to do and then the exact opposite at one time or another. You just don't know exactly how it landed or what you hit, or I don't know. So I would be guessing you may have hit a little bit more of a water pocket than usual. I always figure if you somehow get your bullet back into the paunch, the guts, that's just like a big bag of watery hay back there that stops almost everything. Maybe you nicked enough of that. Maybe, I don't know, something happened, but yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You should have shot through that deer. So if you don't want to risk it again, go back to your Winchesters that have worked well for you. I always say, if you have a particular rifle, cartridge, bullet, any setup that works for you, and you try something else and you don't get the same results, go back to what you were using. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I know it's counter to all these details we go through to figure out the best of the best, but really, that's what matters the most, having confidence in what you're working with. And if it works and it works and it works, keep using it. You can kind of predict what these bullets and cartridges are going to do, but not always. Well, let's see what's happening down in the sunny Florida. Daniel, I guess recently it was snowy Florida. You're welcome. We didn't need any more. You can have it. Mr. Spomer, bottom line, up front, I am seeking assistance in selecting a single factory ammunition to use in my .30-06. I don't reload, and I'm a one-gun hunter. Not just a bullet type, but an actual box of ammo that I can walk into a sporting goods store and purchase. For context, I am the first person in my family to pick up hunting. I talked my dad into letting me buy a Remington 700 on a fateful trip to Walmart when I was 17. His one stipulation for buying it so that I could use it before he transferred it to me when I turned 18 was that I get it chambered in a .30-06. It was the only cartridge he had any familiarity with, as his grandfather had used it when it rose to popularity after World War I. And he didn't want me getting saddled with a strange round that might not work out. Fast forward to today, and I have only ever used that Remington 700 with a $49 Tasco scope to harvest white-tailed deer in the piney woods of Florida. And I used whatever cheapest hunting ammo was on the shelf at the time, all of them inside of 100 yards. However, I'm fortunate enough to be turning my next degree into, a job in northern Utah. Whoa, here we go. I plan to finally purchase a proper optic and set of rings from Vortex so that I can comfortably take advantage of the new hunting opportunities I'll have. So, with all of that said, I would like your help in picking out a good all-round off-the-shelf ammunition for my .30-06. And that I can use out west. From what I have seen in your videos, this is likely a tall order. And what I'm after might not even exist in a single round. I'd like to be able to take an elk if I ever get the chance, while still being able to, now I got to figure out how to open this up. There we go. Come on. Take an elk, while still being able to harvest the tiny whitetails that we have back home. It'd be a big plus. It was affordable enough that I could practice with the same ammunition I'd be hunting with. You don't want much now, do you, buddy? Thank you for all your wonderful videos. I'll keep an eye out for that off-the-shelf ammo. Okay. Oh boy, Daniel, this is the tough one. And the reason it's tough, I won't have so much trouble picking out a right bullet for you. And that's the most important consideration. It's the right bullet. You want a bullet that's going to work on elk. It's got to be fairly tough. You want one that's going to work on your smaller whitetails, and that doesn't have to be as tough, but it won't hurt if it is as tough, as long as you know what to expect, which is you're probably going to shoot through the smaller animals, broadside behind the shoulders, and then they might run 40, 50 yards before they fall over. So be ready for that. But, I mean, I've had that happen with all bullets. And as that earlier gentleman said, he used the premium bullet that was supposed to shoot right through, and it didn't. So be ready for anything. But the reason I can't just say this is the ammo you want to get is because it might not be accurate in your rifle. This is why you actually have to buy and test different ammunition. Now, one of the complaints I get when I say that is I don't want to spend 50 and up per box to find out that after 3 shots it's junk for my rifle. Then what do I do with the rest of it? I don't have that kind of money. So one of my tips on that one is to borrow rounds from someone else. Say, hey, you want to try 3 of my whatever load? I'll try 3 of yours, et cetera, and then figure out which one works for you. Then you can go out and buy it. But with a caveat, is it going to be the right bullet for you? You want one for everything. So I don't think I would recommend a cup and core bullet, not when you go after elk. Now, you could use a cup and core on an elk, but you have to be very careful about your shot placement. Broadside behind the shoulder. I've taken big bull elk with frangible little 130 grain bullets out of a 270, typical cup and core stuff, but I didn't hit much mass before that bullet got into the lungs and the heart area, and then it starts to go to pieces, creates a lot of hemorrhaging, and bingo, I've got my elk in short order. Worked out great. But if I had smacked it straight onto the big bony shoulder with all that muscle mass, might not have gotten there. So got to consider that. So I would look at your controlled expansion bullets first. And I always recommend the coppers because they're so darn reliable. They expand instantly and far, just as they're designed, and then they just keep penetrating. And then you never have to worry about, can I hunt in this region where they've now got a regulation against using lead bullets because of eagles and condors and stuff like that. So you're just set for everything and anything everywhere. That would be my recommendation. So look into that. Look into the Barnes ammunition because they're loading Barnes bullets. But Weatherby is loading some hammer bullets now. And Hornady has all copper bullets in their CX. Winchester, Federal, Remington has their cut bullet, CUT, all copper, Nosler copper. Yeah, everybody has copper bullets these days. So you're going to have to shop around and find your own. I wish I could have just told you to go out and buy this box with this bullet from this brand, but it just wouldn't be fair to you. I'd hate to say that, and then you come back at me and say, good grief, I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Good luck, partner, and welcome to the wonderful West. Now, you're going to find out how hard it is to draw a tag. The nice thing about back east for whitetail is you got a lot of them. My gosh, I know guys who shoot 100 deer in a year legally. You're not doing that out here. Okay. This is Shane from Kansas. Ron, I have often wondered over the last 40 years what might be the best protocol for rechambering rounds when hunting, specifically with a bolt action. In my case, I currently have a Browning X-Bolt with the rotary magazine, and I might go the whole week without taking a shot. But I'm obviously manually unloading the chamber at the end of the day, or whenever I'm getting into a vehicle. I tend to just put that round back at the top of the mag, and it's the first round that I chamber again. What would you suggest, as I've heard this can cause issues with possible setback or just plain inaccuracy issues? I have never heard of any inaccuracy issues unless you damage the bullet while you're doing this. So you've chambered it, now you take it out of the chamber. Sometimes you pull back and it flies through the air and it lands on a rock or something. That could damage it. But I generally put my hand up there and stop it from flying out, and then it's just fine. No, the problem that you come with is the cartridge at the bottom of the magazine, at least if you have a steel box magazine. And the problem there is your cartridges are stacked up down there with the tips riding almost up against that wall or short distance behind it. And when you shoot, the recoil drives that cartridge back and forth and it damages the tip. So there you might start to see some issues. And even a damaged tip isn't that big of a deal for hunting accuracy out to about 300 yards. It's going to change the BC of your bullet by increasing the drag. That will add up after 300 yards. But for most deer hunting situations, guys have been doing this for years. We make all this fuss about the perfect bullet and long-range precision, and you got to have a sharp tip and all this stuff. And then you go out hunting and you damage the tip and don't even notice it, and you end up shooting your deer with it, and you made a perfect shot. You didn't even realize that your bullet was so damaged it was probably not even supposed to work. But it did. We try to overdo some of this stuff. So no, I don't see any problem with reloading that thing again and again in and out of your vehicle and all the rest of it. Just make sure you're not dropping it on the rocks and damaging it too much. And if you do, set it aside and use it for a practice round later. But I think you're going to be fine, Shane. And let's see what Brad from Wisconsin has to ask. Mr. Spomer, it seems to me that at normal hunting distances for the average hunter, several of the new deer cartridges are only marginally better than the old tried and true cartridges. You're absolutely right. I speak specifically of the 6.5 by 55, my daughter's preferred cartridge, and the 7 by 57 Mauser, my preferred, both with 140 grain Sierra bullets. We take dozens of animals, have never lost a deer, killed animals out to 200 and 225 yards. Recoil is not a factor with either one, and we experience minimal meat loss. Frankly, neither of us could ask for or imagine better performance. So my question is, are the new 6.5 and 7mm cartridges worth it? Or are they just something designed to appeal to America's new and improved mentality? Also, it seems new cartridges take up already short cartridge manufacturing capacity and thereby lead to higher costs for traditional favorite cartridges. Example, the 35 Remington is darn hard to find. Well, you got a yes and no from me on this one, partner. I'm all with you on what you're shooting and how well it works. Yes, the 6.555 does the same thing as the 6.5 Creedmoor, maybe even a little better. The 757 does the same thing as the 280 Remington or the 284 Winchester or the 7mm 08. And they're classics, and they work just beautifully. I mean, there's no reason to fuss around with it unless you want to do all this long-range shooting stuff and play with the wind and be a precision shooter and all the rest. But for hunting, out to 200 yards, out to 300 yards, even 400, you give me any of your cartridges or a 30-06 or a 308, I'll get my game. Anybody who trains and knows how to shoot, use a good bullet, but the old rounds are deadlier now than they ever were. But you're right, new and improved, man. That's what drives our economy. And I cannot blame either the manufacturers for creating this stuff or folks like me in my younger years who want to buy it. It's just the way human nature works. You want the latest and greatest. You don't want to buy a 1965 Ford. You want to buy a 2025 whatever. You want the new stuff. Don't have to have it, though. I mean, that's the difference between cartridges and vehicles. There's a lot of significant improvements technologically in vehicles these days compared to what cartridges and bullets were doing back in the 60s. So, no, you don't need to get them. Now, I don't agree, though, that all these new cartridges take up manufacturing capacity, and that's not why the 35 Remington is hard to find. That's just a product of demand. How many people shoot a 35 Remington? They kind of gave up on that long, long ago, as they did adopt the new rounds because they are better ballistic performance kind of thing. Doesn't mean the 35 Remington doesn't work, but it's certainly no 358 Winchester or 35 Whelen or a lot of other modern cartridges in 35. But the manufacturers are more than happy to load all the 35 Remingtons you want. It's just that they load some and they send them out and nobody buys them. They sit on the shelves getting dusty. They quit loading them. Nobody's buying them. Why should we load them? That kind of thing is what's going on there. But, boy, you're sure right about the old rounds working. Stick with them, buddy. You know darn well they're bringing home the bacon. This must be Saskatchewan. I never heard of Kitty Litter. Kitty Litter, Saskatchewan. Charles. I farm and ranch in southwest SK. It's got to be Saskatchewan. In my mid-40s, growing up here, I've seen many new species of wildlife show up. Elk, moose, raccoon, cougar, etc. Wouldn't have dreamed of seeing those when I was a kid. A few points to note. farming has helped wildlife numbers. Prior to settlement, there were few water sources. We had grouse, jackrabbits, and pronghorn antelope. After dugouts and dams and wells were built, whitetails and mule deer moved in. The process of summer fallow hurt wildlife numbers, but nowadays we continuous crop with zero-till practices, which helps wildlife numbers. I live in the prairie. We don't naturally have many trees. Wildfires kept trees at bay until the land was settled. Trees were planted by the farmers. My farming practices take wildlife into account. I let respectful hunters onto my land to ethically harvest nature's bounty. All I ask is a picture of their prize. Well, what a wonderful landowner that is. Charles, you've made a whole bunch of new friends. He continues, I would gladly invite folks to come and enjoy the beautiful sights, sounds, and smells that I enjoy every day. Populations rise and fall in cycles. Presently, large numbers of jackrabbits and Richardson's ground squirrels, gophers in gopher apocalypse is what I regretfully say. Very few deer thanks to chronic wasting disease. You're welcome to come and help with the gopher hunt in the spring. I'll supply the .22 ammunition. Boy, I'm not going to give your address out, Charles. I'm just going to go myself. Thanks. Keep encouraging folks to hunt safely and responsibly. It's much appreciated. Well, that is a great letter, Charles, and I really thank you for that. And I am quite often disparaging farmers and ranchers because I've seen so much of it done wrong. But boy, when I bump into a landowner like you who recognizes wildlife numbers and appreciates how habitat improvements work to their advantage. You mean you're certainly right about the dugouts and the dams and the wells and crops as well. Way back in the day in the prairie states, I grew up in a prairie state too. Mine was South Dakota. By the time I came along, it had already been pretty much broken out. But there were probably, I would say, on every square mile, there was left about a 40 to 60 to 80 acre chunk of native grassland. And that was because most of the settlers kept a small chunk of native grass to feed their milk cow, because they knew with the droughts that come, the bad weather and everything else, you might lose your crop, but you're not going to lose your prairie grass. It's native, it's adapted to that, and you're going to be able to feed some cows on it. Maybe get your chickens out in it to get bugs and insects and different things. Helps you survive. But by the time the 70s rolled around and we had gotten mechanized everything and figured, well, we don't need it anymore, they plowed it up, and there went all the jackrabbits. What first went when they plowed up everything were the prairie chickens until the population was in the toilet. But a researcher did some studies, and he found that the prairie chicken population reached its peak numbers when 60% of the native prairie was left as native prairie and 40% was put into crops. That mixture of crops surrounded by the grasslands provided more food for the birds. They still had enough habitat in which to escape predators and nest, but now they had more food, so the population increased thanks to farming. But then when they made it where it's 80-90% farm ground and the rest was prairie, not enough nesting cover anymore, not enough escape cover, and the population plummeted. So things like that are what we need to consider. And as you said, when you make changes like more water, more crops on the ground, trees in the prairie that didn't used to exist, well, with trees, you're going to get new species that need trees, not the grassland species like pronghorns and prairie chickens. Yeah, so things change, but if farming is done judiciously with an eye towards this sort of thing, we can change habitat, manipulate it, improve it, and such to increase our wildlife populations. Thanks for that, Charles. I might look you up come spring gopher season. And now the final is not too far from you in Mobridge, South Dakota. That's right up north, getting against the North Dakota border. And Leo up there says, first of all, I love to see your YouTube videos. The content is wonderful. Well, thanks, Leo. My question is this: have you or are you going to do an updated version of the 25-06 Performance now that you can get them in a 7.5 twist or faster barrel and readily available Berger bullets? They got the 133 grain bullet, and it's available in the 257. Yeah, I am, Leo. If I can get the temperatures to come up a little bit here, I've got this 25-06 improved that I need to get out and do some more work on. I also have my regular 25-06, but I picked up some of these longer bullets. I've got some of those Ace bullets in 131 grain, and I've got some new, I think it's 135 grain from Hornady I picked up. So I got to start loading those and see what they're going to do in these fast twist barrels. So yeah, we're going to be working on that one. Hang in there. All right, it's time for our comment of the week, and this one's going to go to Aaron. Aaron asked about killing deer with a 7 rem mag, wasting his ammunition. Too powerful. Why throw a bullet that fast just to take a little old deer? It's an interesting but not unusual take on hunting. And as we said in our response, yes, you could just go to a 7mm 08. That's more than enough for taking that size of game animal out to 300 yards. But you can also step down in bullet weight. You don't need that 175 grain bullet. It's a good reminder to think about what we actually need our cartridges for. It's just way too easy to say we need a super magnum when we really don't. We just want to be able to brag that we've got the super magnum. So consider that, and then also consider that option of hand loading down, reducing your powders, and you get your velocity from magnum levels down to normal, and you can sort of double duty with your rifle that way. So thanks for thinking, folks. You're doing a great job. I really appreciate all the help. And I guess we'll see you next time. Hunt honest and shoot straight.